Good morning, Los Angeles First United Methodist Church. I am joining you today from a really interesting location. My son is on a baseball trip, and so we are as safely as possible making our way across the country. And so today we're in Las Vegas for him to play a couple of games as we make our way to Birmingham, Alabama. It's a blessing to be with you. I'm so excited about the service today. My dear, dear friend, Reverend Dr. Sam Parks, who's the pastor at Mary Esther United Methodist Church in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, which is in the Panhandle, right south of Alabama. Sam and I will be doing a dialogue sermon today on Psalm 13. So I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you for spending some time with us this morning. It's a blessing always to worship with you, and so we'd like to start with some music.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. It's time to stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs, mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What's going down? What's going down? What's going down?
It's a blessing to see you all greeting each other and checking in the chat. I'd like to invite you to continue doing so as you pass the peace of Christ to one another. I want to apologize because a couple of reasons. One, I didn't turn on my do not disturb, and second of all, because the Wi-Fi here in the hotel is not ideal. So we're working with what we have. If you're having a frustrating problem with the transmission, this broadcast will be saved and then posted to our website immediately following the service. So you can go back and see it in its entirety there, and hopefully the bandwidth will be a little bit better when we do it that way. Also, if you have the order of worship, Savannah's posted the link, which you can see in the bottom of the broadcast here. That link, the order of worship, will have links to most of the videos that you'll see. The only thing it won't have are any live components that we do, like the prayers. While you are here and I have your attention, I do want to invite you to go ahead and post your comments in the chat so that we can get a sense of your joys and concerns and we can share those together. It's always a gift to see you with us. So good morning to everybody as you're arriving. We do have a few announcements to bring to your attention today. The first is that today's sermon will be a dialogue sermon with Reverend Dr. Sam Parks, who is one of my very dearest friends in the whole wide world, and he also happens to be a very gifted preacher. So Sam and I will be doing a dialogue sermon that we recorded via Zoom earlier this week on Psalm 13, the spiritual discipline of lament. So I'm very grateful to welcome Sam with us, if not in person, at least in presence. Next week, well, I should also say that today is the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City. We want to take time to honor and celebrate and recognize that this is not only Pride Sunday, but this is the day, the very day, June 28th, 51 years ago, when the gay revolution began. And as much as we can celebrate 5 years of the SCOTUS decision for marriage equality for all, and so many of the ways in which it is a little more equitable for the LGBTQ community, we can obviously see lots of ways in which it isn't. So we want to ensure that we take time to honor, hear, recognize, and listen to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and siblings in Christ. So next week, the CalPAC Annual Conference and the LGBTQ Task Force has created a really beautiful worship service for us to use. So we're going to be focusing our attention on that next week. We also want to remind you that we are continuing our stewardship campaign. Our aim is to raise $20,000 a month to help with payroll expenses. As you know, the economic downturn has made a significant impact on our ability to draw revenue from the parking lot. And so we are doing what we haven't had to do before, which is ask for help with our operating budget. If you are willing, able, we have been so wonderfully overwhelmed by your generosity. Many of us are in a point now where we just simply can't give more because our jobs have been eliminated, our work has been set aside. So we understand that this is not feasible for everyone. But if you're in a position where you can be generous and gracious with that, we are certainly grateful for all of you that are able to give. Savannah was really thoughtful to place our link to the Venmo in the chat, so you can find us there. Tomorrow night we'll be having our Zoom Bible study. It'll be week 4 of the Disciple Bible Study series. It will be from 5:30 to 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I'm going to be in the middle of a drive. I'm probably leading it from the back of a minivan. So we'll see how that goes. If you'd like to join, you're always welcome. We'd love to see you. So Savannah has posted the link to that Zoom in our chat as well. We're nearing the end of our start of the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge, but if you haven't begun that and would like to start on your own, you're more than welcome to. You'll find a link to all of the resources on our website. We have an entire page built for resources to help with the process of becoming anti-racist, as we recognize and honor that Black lives do indeed matter. So if you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome to do so, but also you are more than welcome on your own time to start whenever you're ready. I am trying to keep an eye on your comments over here. Sarah, I just saw one of your prayers. Immediately following this, we will be having our Zoom coffee hour. I think I'll be able to jump on and start that for a bit. I may have to need some transition time from hotel to baseball field. But Savannah has put the link to the coffee hour in the chat. And at this time, we like to honor and recognize your prayers. Sarah, I see that Al Lopez, the husband of our past UMW West District President, Betty Lopez, passed away this past week. So prayers for the Lopez family and all of their friends and everyone who knew and loved them. Thank you so much for lifting up Al. Of course, the last couple of days in our world and in our nation have been particularly challenging. I could say that every week and it would always be accurate, but we want to continue praying for Northern California, where there was a shooting yesterday, for the victims of the shooting in Louisville, Kentucky, These are really, really hard times, and it's becoming even harder to find hope. So I appreciate all the ways in which you are continuing to keep pushing through and persevering. Natalie Faulkner, it's such a gift to see you. We will pray for your church, Allen Memorial UMC in Oxford, Georgia. You start back, I think I'm understanding that you start back in person worship on August 2nd. Our prayers for you. Hi, Trudy. Trudy is a beloved friend from Atlanta. Your brother lost his job of 33 years this week. As we continue to see the unemployment numbers rise, we know that those are not just numbers, those are people and families that are affected. We will certainly hold your brother in his particular time, place, and situation in our prayers as we continue to watch all of the numbers as they're rising, and none of them are positive. So we're going to continue praying for the health, safety, and well-being of everyone. And just as we go, it's a joy to always see you, Giancarla and Debbie. Debbie, you shared with me a couple of prayer requests this week, and so we want to remember Dee Dee, who was diagnosed with cancer this week. And the prognosis is positive and optimistic, but obviously that's never a happy bit of information to hear. Marshall, prayers for your family and friends in South and Central America and Mexico, of course. Thank you so much for sharing that. We also want to share prayers for Debbie's brother, who's having knee replacement surgery this week. And good morning, Oscar and Andrew. Marshall, it's so wonderful to see you. And of course, Olu, always a gift. As we take these prayers and these joys and concerns, there's obviously so much more that we could and should and need to say, but let's take this time to pray together. Holy, gracious, and loving God, hear our prayer. Take these joys, hold them closely and neatly and dearly and tenderly. In such times as these, it's even harder to find ways to celebrate that feel appropriate. Remind us that hope is perseverant, that it's still possible for good news to happen. And for all who are sick and suffering, lost and alone, fighting, hoping, we ask that you will guide and keep us close and safe, that we can continue in the way that leads to light. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And as we hear these prayers, we'll invite you to turn your attention to this beautiful music. I'm always grateful for the beautiful music of El Dorado to help center and focus and keep us mindful. Today's service is a little different for a couple of reasons, not just location and terrible Wi-Fi, but we have been able to coordinate our efforts with Mary Esther United Methodist Church. And today's scripture reading is from Psalm 13. And today, Kirk Hatcher will be reading that for us. So I'll invite you to turn your attention to Kirk as he reads this for us.
Let us now seek our footing in Psalms 13, and I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trust in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of this word.
I'm so grateful for Kirk's reading today. Because we are battling some technical difficulties on our end, I'm going to do my best to try and screen share the sermon. So it may not look quite like it normally looks, but hopefully it will transmit all the ways that it needs to. So, friends, it's my honor to welcome and celebrate Reverend Dr. Sam Person Parks as we do a dialogue sermon today.
Mandy Sloan McDow, welcome to Mary Esther United Methodist Church. I've been excited for this opportunity to chat with you and to allow our congregation to hear some different voices. I plan to do this on a fairly regular basis so that my congregation, because you know they hear my junk all the time, right? So I've been here a couple of years, and so they know a lot of my tricks, and so I want to expose them to some different voices. So thank you for being willing to come and share some time with us.
It's an honor. You and I have been friends for a long time, but you've been teaching me longer than you probably realize. And so anytime you want to talk to me, 30 minutes. I'm honored to be a part of the conversation because I always wind up learning far more than I may contribute. So on behalf of me and my congregation, who are also really glad to have some additional voices preaching on Sunday.
Oh, that's right, because we're showing this both directions. Yes, we are. So that's great. Yes, and I'm delighted to be with First United Methodist Church in Los Angeles as well.
He's pitching. He's probably going to pitch game one start. So you should.
Clearly, the psalmist has encountered a crisis of some kind. And that crisis is now giving way to complaint, or what we would call lament. And I know that lamentation is not something that our culture seems very adept
Yes.
at. Why do you think that is? Why do you
So
think
I got it to work.
lamentation is difficult for people? And what do we tend to do instead?
Such a good question. I mean, we live in a culture that I'd say too that we're living in a time where some of that is probably shifting. But one of the things I would see consistently, I have a daughter, and so I see the things that are marketed for girls in terms of clothing and apparel and attire, and the thing that they want to stamp on every T-shirt is good vibes only, and it annoys me because I do not espouse good vibes only. And I feel like it's the plea to say, I can't handle your truth. And if there's one thing that seems to be clear right now, it's that, at very least in America, America's telling the truth. Now, I'm not saying that the truth hadn't been told before. Of course it had. Of course it had. But now everyone's listening.
Yeah. And that's not, as we were saying a little bit earlier, that not everyone is in a place where they're prepared to hear, whether it's the lamentation of others, or even the need to raise their voice and say 4 times, like this psalmist does in 2 verses, how long, right? How long is this going to last? And I think it has been a crazy year. I mean, do you remember back when there were wildfires in Australia? Doesn't that seem like it was about 5 years ago?
Yes. Or like a book I read once when I was a kid. I mean, so serious, everyone very concerned. But that was like 31 years ago. I literally couldn't quantify how much time it's been.
And then, then suddenly we find ourselves thrust into a worldwide pandemic, which causes massive disruptions. We also see people of color suffer with that disease at more destructive rates than white people do. So, I've wondered to myself if some of that angst, and then of course it doesn't feed into this experience of seeing, in particular, these 3 murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and just the gut-wrenching lament, I think that rises up from so many people of all hues, right, at seeing that, has forced us in some ways into a period of lament.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's true too, based on all the things that you just said, that some cultures do lament real well, really well. And so gospel music is based in lament. And that is one of the reasons why I think we're turning to this right now, is because there's language borrowed from the Psalms, borrowed from Scripture, borrowed from Exodus, borrowed from the language of people who've been lamenting all this time. And we talk about fragility. I love the idea that fragility can be described in 2 very different ways. One is that we just can't take it, and that's something that needs to.
It's just so hard. I can't watch that anymore today.
Yes. No, I mean, granted, we all have like our capacity to deal with hard things, but dealing with hard things is the first step. Ignoring them and pretending like they don't exist is a crisis of fragility that needs to be dealt with. And I think it's that sort of fragility prevents lament from being a common language. Mm. And most people don't have the benefit of fragility. People who have been oppressed do not have the benefit of fragility at all. So lament becomes the only language that we have to contend with what is true, and in some ways what is universal to the experience of being oppressed. And the worst thing is that if you're the oppressor, you have to contend with some really ugly things about yourself. I know I have. And that takes work.
What seems to be bugging the psalmist the most here, do you think, in these first 2 verses?
How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? I mean, that just touches right there on my own personal fear of abandonment. That's what I immediately think of is an interpersonal relationship that has gone awry. Like that's the language of a breakup right there.
Yeah, yeah. It feels a little bit adolescent maybe to me, and maybe that's just me, but it's just like it's forever, right? And
Yes.
always, and like how long is this just taking forever? Um, but still, there are times and moments when we feel, I think, so disconnected from the God that we in my preaching 2 weeks ago, I talked about Psalms of orientation, which are Psalms that reflect life when life is good, and you can just proclaim God as trustworthy and true and patient and present and high and lifted up, and just this soaring language about one's relationship with God. And when that feels like it's been disconnected, it's painful, right? It is painful.
Yeah. And the second verse about bearing pain in my soul. One of the things I really appreciate about the Psalms is that there is a variety of emotional experiences represented, even in the context of one psalm itself. And we'll move to that in a bit. But for what you're discussing about Psalms of orientation, and this one clearly being a psalm of disorientation, how quickly it seems that move happens for the psalmist.
Yes.
And I think, if we're going into a question about like, well, what does this psalm tell me about God, or how is God moving in this particular psalm? Right now, it's very egocentric. This is 100% based on the experience of the psalmist trying to figure out where God's face is.
Yes. Yes. It's very close to the individual person who's praying. And pain does that. Pain brings us into our skin. Right. So then in the next two verses of the psalm, there is this move, as one of the commentaries that I was reading said, that we've gone from crisis to complaint, but now the mood shifts a bit from complaint to plea, right? Just to like supplication, right? Where the psalmist says, answer me, God. Give light to my eyes, or I shall sleep the sleep of death. What do you think is going on there?
I mean, there's a definite tonal shift here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the point where the psalmist stops focusing internally. And again, to what you said earlier, pain is personal. And when anyone is in pain, whether it is physical, emotional, or social, that pain limits our access to things outside of ourselves. So this is not a critique of what pain does, more than it is an awareness that it will bring us inward. And the whole world starts becoming about our own experience of how to contend with the pain. And this seems to be the shift. Verse 3 seems to be the shift where the psalmist finally turns outward. And even though the plea has been, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, the demand for an answer, I think, is the invitation for God to participate in the conversation. And the thing I really love about this is something that I think we wrestle with. If we tend to be so fragile that we can't even lament, we can't even name hard emotions, I think one of the second flaws of the Christian role of trying to be faithful is the idea that we can't ask God hard questions.
And one of the great gifts of the entire book of Psalms is that, like I have said over and over in this series, that there is a psalm for every season of life. And there is no question left unasked, right? There is no stone left unturned in one's relationship, with God. And it is a gift for us to be able to witness here ostensibly David, the king of right, the king of Israel, a man at quote unquote after God's own heart, who then is able to, at the beginning of this psalm, shake their fist at the heavens and accuse, not only complain, but accuse God of deliberately ignoring him. But then to take that breath, I can hear the breath between verse 2 and verse 3.
Right?
Where the psalmist is like, okay, all right, consider me, O Lord, and answer me, right? Like, okay, I'm calming down a bit. We can have more, there's a possibility for two-way communication, right?
Yeah.
But I think all of us at some point in time in relationships have, and so what the psalmist seems to do is to basically treat God more or less like anyone else, like any other relationship in their lives.
Yeah. I like to put this in the language of, we try to think about what can I tell God? Like I'm angry at God, but I'm not going to tell God that because I don't want to make God angry at me.
Yeah.
And I think if God created the heavens, the earth, and all that is in it, God can take it. God can handle your anger. God can handle the injustice that you're experiencing. God can handle your lament. God can handle your whining. God can take it. God can take it. And the worst thing we can do is to stay silent, because that ends the communication.
Yes.
And right? So I love the idea that the psalmist is insisting now on dialogue. Like I've said my piece and counted to 10, and it's your turn, and I need answers. And I think time and again, like Job is probably the best example of this, when God shows up at the last third of the book and says, "Where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? When I laid the foundation of the world? Where were you? Because I can tell you where you were."
Yeah.
I know where you were. I was there all along. And you mentioned it in your dynamic, talking about what this means for trust. And I think you and I have addressed what is the nature of lament. And the nature of lament comes from a relationship that matters.
Yes.
It didn't matter. I wouldn't lament to somebody who doesn't know my story, who doesn't know me, who I don't trust with my feelings or my experiences. So this is a conversation that is predicated on trust.
What I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that to complain and to bring our whole selves before God is not an expression of our doubt in God's presence or action in our lives. It is the expression of trust and faith.
Yes. Exactly. And I think one of the reasons that we get afraid to fist shake our, the hands of the heavens is because God responds, and it's pleasant sometimes. Isn't that what the task of faith is to both know God and love God, and then be changed by that relationship. And so our fear is that God is so judgmental and so angry. But the thing that is 100% consistent is that it's never anger that upsets God. It's infidelity.
Oh, the language, the language that we hear frequently throughout the Bible is that I am a jealous God.
Yeah.
Right. I am a jealous God. That I think that is so wise and insightful, that God can handle our anger, and I think God hears and cares about our anger and our difficult experiences and our experiences of being lonely or the absence of God. But I think God has a hard time, apparently biblically, a hard time tolerating when we just easily, trollop off to worship something else,
Yeah. And, David is not immune to that, which means that David's idolatry of Bathsheba and the subsequent events that transpire, in which he deals with Uriah. All of that means that David is not immune to his own capacity to build an idol and to turn away from God. And so what this tells me is that as much as God really doesn't like that, God consistently returns and consistently stays active in the relationship between us and God, even when we're bad at it.
What are the idols that tempt us away from a God who both seeks to minister, comfort, and care for us in our illnesses, but then also seeks justice for, and equanimity for God's people? What are the things that we're likely to turn to as idols?
The first thing that came to mind is tradition.
Say more about that.
When I moved to Atlanta, I saw with my own two eyes the fact that everybody in any kind of service position was Black. And I'd known for a long time, I was aware of the absolute distinction between the white experience and the Black experience, but had no sense of my own capacity to do anything about it. And frankly, it's a helpless feeling because, one of the things I've had to be clear about with myself and my very white children is that we are born privileged. We are born racist. We have to do this very systemic, internal, eye-opening, painful work to dismantle the structures of racism that we have so easily built into the fabric of our lives. And it could take everything down.
One of the things that I had to, when that word was first applied to me, racist, and when I began to try to apply it to myself and felt that pushback, I had to embrace for myself that it's not about my badness or my goodness, it's about my blindness or my sightedness, okay? Yeah. So we can still be super nice. We can be super nice people with only the best of intentions. Yeah. But because we just can't see, right? We just can't see what and we don't often trust what people of color are telling us about the place where we live and the structures and systems that we maintain. So.
One of the points that when you and I were prepping for this, one of the things, and I feel certain it came from you. So Sam, I'm gonna quote you and credit you, but I also want to say it out loud because I think it's important. One of the things that happens in verse 3 when the psalmist says, "Give light to my eyes," I think for a lot of us, our eyes, as you said, we are now sighted where we once were blind. And you said the shift here comes. We stop projecting our crisis onto God, and we own it for ourselves.
I think that was mutually developed, but anyway, it was the conversation that made it happen. So there you go. I think in our initial panic and anxiety, panic attack over the brokenness, what feels like a brokenness in our relationship with God, we don't want to own it. And, we blame God, but God is big enough to handle it. But there will hopefully come a moment when we turn and say, well, maybe it's what I can't see. Yeah. And maybe I need your help, God, to see something bigger. Now, I will say that the psalmist talks about wanting to win a lot. Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't want their enemies to rejoice over them. Doesn't want, what is the language? Yes, my foes will rejoice because I'm shaken. Which led me to kind of wonder, I wonder if that's why God might be feeling absent, because I'm not sure that God's agenda is all about winning.
Yeah. Like, what is God winning here?
Or defeating, I'm not sure that God is all about defeating our enemies, right? I think that's where we see in the person of Jesus Christ, that God who doesn't accompany us in all of our more or less petty feelings of anger at people who disdain us or whatever. There's some other better way to say that. I'm trying to hook some Jesus in here, Mandy.
You're doing it. But it's that idea that, like, every sports team that prays, like, God, give us this victory, like the other sports team, God somehow up in heaven with the remote, like, not the Dodgers again. Jesus actually does say a lot about enemies, and offensive things, mean, nasty things like love them and turn the other cheek. You haven't met my enemies, Jesus. They're terrible. I'm sure you don't mean that.
Like, if you have anything against your brother, leave your offering at the altar and go and be reconciled to them. And then, you mean you're telling me that I can't even authentically worship unless I fix it with my enemies? So, that makes me wonder in this psalm whether God is feeling absent, because that's just not God's jam. That's not God's bag, right?
Right.
So. Well, then there's this third movement, and it's the movement, I think sometimes we short circuit these first two of the prayer of complaint and then the prayer of supplication, and we kind of get here too quickly. But if we will go through these first two paths, right, through these first two doorways, then we can then enter into this room of praise, moving from plea to praise with a lot more appreciative and fuller voice.
And it's this kind of like dings back on the idea of cheap grace, right? Like, this psalm is only 6 verses.
Yeah, right.
And to go from how long will you hide your face to me to I will sing to the Lord because he's dealt bountifully with me. Like, we have skipped over a lot of emotional trajectory here. And I find it, this is like, what are we, good vibes only now? Like, I'm not satisfied that we had enough time, but it's because for whatever reason, the psalm was brief. And for whatever reason, it encapsulated the emotional arc that needed to be described, which is, complaint, plea, praise. Like, that's it. That's enough. Those are all the things you have to do.
That's
and perhaps we get to this because the psalmist was honest.
Yeah, right. So we arrive at this point of praise. And one of the things that I love about these last two verses is this sense of perspective, the verb tenses. And here's what, the psalmist says: I trusted, past tense, in your steadfast love, and so my heart shall rejoice in your salvation, right? Because I trusted you in the past and have experienced salvation from you in the past, all right, I'm willing to be patient, knowing that my day of rejoicing is going to come. I know your deliverance is going to come. And I love that. I think one of the idols that we can turn to is nostalgia.
Oh, yes. Well said. I think that's really what tradition is, right?
Right. In other words, right. Or let's
heritage.
Say that there's a healthy form of tradition and a pathological form of tradition. Yes. Right? That there's a kind of tradition that we use to avoid to avoid change.
Right? Yeah.
To avoid adaptation and growth, personal growth. Growth as a congregation, right?
There's as a country, right?
Huh? And see,
growth as a country, yeah.
So there's that sense of nostalgia. However, there is a healthy sense of tradition, a healthy sense of relating to the past,
right?
And that is drawing on our experiences of grace that can provide us just enough hope that we believe we will not only experience that grace in the future, but we can actually become a source of it, right? For other people.
Mm. The idea, there's this wonderful James Baldwin quote. James Baldwin wrote, "The history is not past, it is the present. We carry our history with us." And this idea that the tension between the psalmist saying, "Because I trusted in your steadfast love, I will rejoice in your salvation and I will sing to the Lord." Like these things are not distinct, they're not separate. And in the sense that God lives in time in an eternal way that is different than our chronological way of thinking, this sort of unravels the entire experience of what it means to be in relationship with the eternal being. It's
Yes.
that, we're so limited. We are finite. We're on a time with calendars. God doesn't live that way. God does not exist that way. God can be past, present, future. Jesus can be crucified, died, and risen, and ascended, and yet present. God is different than us. And we are so finite in our capacity to both understand that. I mean, we just are, but
Yes.
also to give God grace to be God. Well, and I think that that's the, if anything that we're learning right now, it's that words are futile unless they are paired with action. Then, one of the gut punch things that's really easy for me to say is, but I didn't do that. I didn't treat you that way.
Right.
I didn't. Yes, I did. Absolutely, I did. Because my history and my ancestors are 100% culpable and responsible. And if I have the audacity and the hubris to think that I don't benefit from that today, I am wrong. And I can't look away from my wrongness anymore. So my history is not past. My awareness of my place in time does not relieve me from the responsibility that I have now. That my past holds me accountable to how I live, not just in the present, but in the future.
So let me wrap up in this way. Let me see if I can make a summative statement of some kind. That what this psalm does for us, or what God offers us through the gift of the Word of God in this psalm, is the knowledge that we can be unvarnished in who we are before God. That in our difficulty in our relationship with God, that may be more about us than it is about God. And that there are some things perhaps we need to understand about ourselves, that we need light to the eyes so that we can see some things. But that praise of God really is born out of a long game with the divine. And it's not our game, right? It's God's long game with us, right? Nobody does this better than Methodists, right? Prevenient grace, justifying grace, sanctifying grace, glorifying grace, 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 grace upon grace. But that each moment of difficulty and lament needs to be authentically experienced, but it also needs to be, we also need to be able to rise up, like we put our spiritual drone out a little bit so that we can see sort of the larger landscape of God, not in a cheap way, right? Not to just get past lament, but in order to put it in a larger sense of perspective. Does that help?
I think that's great. Well, that was a fun exercise in technology. You can tell I have some comedians who are traveling with me, and we didn't realize that our microphone wasn't muted when the video first started. So thank you to those of you who pointed that out, and for your patience, especially as my email suddenly came up. Fortunately, I don't think there's anything terribly interesting. You can see a lot of newsletters I subscribe to. But I'm particularly grateful for Sam and for this opportunity for us to have a conversation together. I always learn something when we talk, and it was a blessing to be able to do this in a way that we could share it with you. As we come to the end of our service, I just want to invite you to take this time to pray with me the Lord's Prayer. I am short on communion elements here, so we'll just invite you to do that in your own way, in your own home. But I do think it's meaningful and important for us to share the Lord's Prayer together. So friends, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I also realize I'm in a spinny chair, and I can't seem to stop myself. Friends, we're going to close our service today with one more beautiful piece of music from El Dorado. So I'll invite you to, if you have communion, to share it amongst yourself or your family, whoever happens to be with you. And we will join for a benediction briefly after this beautiful music.
If this is redemption, why do I bother at all? There's nothing to mention, and nothing has changed. So I'd rather be working for something than praying for the rain. So I wander on till someone else is saved. I moved to the coast, under a mountain, swam in the ocean, slept on my own. At dawn I would watch the sun cut ribbons through the bay. I remember all the things my mother wrote. That we don't eat until your father's at the table. We don't drink until the devil's turned to dust. Never once has any man I met been able to love. So if I were you, I'd have a little trust. 2,000 years now, been in that water. 2,000 years, sunk like a stone. Desperately reaching for nets that the fishermen have thrown, trying to find just a little bit of rope. I was holding all of my secrets often hid. Pages were folded, and there was nothing at all. So if in the future I might need myself a savior, I'll remember what was written on that wall. We don't eat until your father's at the table, and we don't drink until the devil's turned to dust. And never once has any man I've met been able to love. So if I were you, I'd have a little trust. Man and true, have I been good to you at all? Oh, I'm so tired of playing these games. just be running down the same old lines, the same old stories of breathless trains and worn down glories, houses burning, worlds that turn on their own. So we don't eat until your father's at the table. We don't drink until the devil's turned to dust. Never once has any man I've met been able to know. So if I were you, my learn to have just a little bit of trust.
Friends, thank you so much for your patience with us and all of our adaptability and technology challenges, but also for the great gift that this brings us and the ability to stay together, to stay connected, and to have multiple voices involved. Wonderful gifts of people who we wouldn't normally get to interact with. So we invite you to join us for our Zoom coffee hour. Savannah posted the link in the chat a little while ago, and if I keep talking, I bet she might be able to do it again so that I can add it to the screen. Please feel free to join us for that. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to worship together with you, and we'll remind you as you go that God is with you, God is for you, and God refuses to be God without you. And may all God's people say, Amen.